Hello, this is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is April 22nd, 2024. Today, I want to revisit the federal government policy on homelessness. Back in July of last year, I talked about the federal government policy, which is administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and it provides funding for emergency shelters, permanent housing, transitional housing. And this year, in fiscal year 24, they are providing $3.16 billion, but I'll get into funding a little bit more later. Why am I talking about this? There is a Supreme Court case that are before the justices this week. And it started back in 2018 in Oregon when the Oregon Law Center filed a lawsuit claiming that a public park called Grants Pass was trying to roam homeless people out of town by fining people for sleeping outside. And so it went various levels back and forth with the courts in between the Supreme Court. There was also another case in the city of Boise where an appeals court ruled that cities can't enforce anti-camping ordinances if there aren't any shelter beds available. Now, these two cases are very important to you as a taxpayer because the Supreme Court case, if it goes the wrong way and homeless people can't be fined, or basically a method to spur them to not camp in public places indefinitely, then when you go to your local parks, no matter what state you're in, and this is only occurring in a couple of states heavily. One of them is California, and as I told you last July, Vermont and Oregon. And Oregon seems to be a big problem. Now, it is next to California, so I get it that people leave there to go somewhere where the laws are more favorable. I'm not going to get into both sides' assertions. We just want to look at it from a taxpayer perspective at this point and what you won't hear the local streaming networks talking about. Why am I saying it like this? We fund, the federal government, the U.S. taxpayers fund yearly. So in 2023, HUD financed $259.7 billion. And so a supplemental to that in 2024, what I was just talking about, was $3.16 billion, but this one was an award for even more projects for assistance for people who are homeless. So the federal government is doing their part and they are funding it. The U.S. taxpayers realize that we want to help people in need. We just don't want to help them indefinitely. And I'll tell you why I said it that way in a second. So if I'm looking at organizations, okay, the U.S. government is doing its part. There's also some nonprofits out there that fund $11 million per year. They're focused in those 5 states. And oh, by the way, it isn't a national problem. It's in 5 or 6 states heavily where there are a huge population of homeless people for various reasons. And again, I'm not going to get into why people are homeless. That would be a different program in itself. I really want to focus on taxpayer dollars being used and state and local governments not using the money allocated to help people. Now, with The Supreme Court case, cities were forced to penalize people to prompt them to leave. If you're homeless, there was no expectation that if you find someone that they're going to pay, what they're actually trying to do is force them to go somewhere else. And in Oregon, there's probably lots of areas where nobody lives where they could have gone, but they decided to go to the city and make it the local people's issue in that town in Oregon. When we look at how the money from the federal government gets to local officials, it seems like the funding goes to the state capital first, and then it trickles down to whoever needs it. So in Oregon's case, I would like to know when they got the money. They actually could have requested more money since they had more homeless people. So why are people living outside in the park when the states have money to build additional shelters if they need it in Oregon? So we'll look at that aspect of it later. The Supreme Court has a difficult task because if they say that you cannot fine people who are on public property, that could affect us all. You could foreseeably, and I'm here in Illinois, in Belleville, Illinois, going to the park, people are pitching tents, and the people who want to come to the park to ride bikes or come with their families, they're not going to be able to do that. And if you don't believe that, read about Grants Pass, because it's not only there, but places in California the same way. And you've got churches trying to help. You got these nonprofits. People care. But I would tell you that some of the people involved, the homeless, they don't seem to care. And they're okay with living on public property and pretty much throwing up their hands and they want to be left alone, and they want to be able to live in their tent on public property indefinitely. So if the people affected, and I'm not saying that it's all of them, some of the homeless want to do better. Homeless shelter, get assistance from the federal government, and then move on, right? Because in cities like San Francisco, it costs the cities $5,000 per tent per month to house homeless people. And this is in the parking lots. They've got an organization called the Dream Center. They get $6,000 per person for a full year of rehab to try to get people back on their feet. So people care. I'm saying all this to say that with a lot of the programs that the federal government is trying to do, if the people affected don't care and have some kind of ownership in responsibility, rehabilitation, and trying to change their circumstances, we can throw money at it for the next 50 years. I'm 60 now, and the homeless situation has been pretty much the same. Taxpayers want to help. Local officials want to help. Most of them do. I would tell you that some of them create more chaos with what they're doing by not funding, spending money to get more shelters in place, especially if you have people in need. And I wonder in Oregon how much money the federal government has given them that they haven't used to build shelters. So I want you to stay tuned to the Supreme Court case, because if the Supreme Court says that you can't fine people because it's cruel and unusual punishment, as the appeals court has said, and violates the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution, because that's how they've turned the narrative right now. So if the Supreme Court says that you can't fine people who are in tents in public places, watch out to what will happen next. This is George. This is Just Listen. Let me know what you think.